Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Nick DiMartino. That's Anthony Balester. That's Will Charlton. This is another episode of Forever Power 5. First, you can follow us on social media at FP5ETB on Twitter and Instagram, and at Forever Power 5 on TikTok. No spaces or caps. And, Forever Power 5 on Facebook. You can follow the Empty the Bench Network at ETB Network on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick DMart. Follow Anthony at Balester555. You can also follow Zan at Zambando99. And you can follow Will at Will Charlton. Is that H13?
That's right.
H13. All right. It's a code. Is that Instagram too, or just Twitter?
That's just Twitter.
Okay.
Instagram is at Will Charlton TV.
Okay, that's much easier.
Yeah.
At Will Charlton TV. So you can follow the Empty the Bench Network on youtube.com/ETB Network. You can listen to this show and all Empty the Bench shows on etbpodcast.com. And you can listen to Forever Power 5 wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure to like and subscribe. And, of course, Forever Power 5 is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. All right, so the rankings. The new college football playoff rankings are finally out. It's hold on. It's a little weird with the whole 12. It's a little weird with the whole 12 team thing. Georgia drops from 3 to 12 because of the loss to Ole Miss. I do have a few thoughts on this. Part of me does think Georgia dropped a little too low, but what I will say is I think that, which we don't normally see from the committee, which I think is kind of a product of the 12-team playoff, they seem to be really second-guessing what they decided last week, if that makes any sense. Like, they seem to be thinking to themselves, like, okay, we were totally wrong about this. I mean, Georgia lost to Ole Miss on the road. We all have a lot of criticisms of Georgia and their game, and we'll get to all of them. But they also dropped 9 spots. That's quadruple where they were. They went from 3 to 12 after losing to Ole Miss. And then as a result of Georgia and Miami both losing, Indiana and BYU ended up moving up. And now Indiana and BYU ended up playing probably their worst games of the season so far. BYU was very lucky to win that game, and we'll get into that. And Indiana won by 2 points against Michigan, and we all know Michigan stinks, and a game that they should be winning by a bigger margin. What were your guys' thoughts on these rankings?
Yeah, I agree. I thought Georgia dropped to where they should. I think it was mainly a culmination, maybe not just one game. I think it's mainly a culmination of the struggles we've seen outside of from Georgia. I mean, besides the win against Texas, they've really struggled. They struggled against Kentucky, and they even struggled last week against Florida. So I think this has just been a thing that's been on its way. I mean, I think the committee got it right. Besides that, if you want to make the argument that maybe they could be ahead of Miami, I could see that. Miami has struggled as well. So if you want to put Georgia ahead of Miami, I'm all for that. But maybe outside of a spot or two, I think they got it right. Again, I'm going to go back to this. I still think Texas. I'm not so sold on Texas. Texas doesn't have a great resume. And I know they have the eye test. They have a lot of great players, and we know they have the potential. But I think they're ranked a little too high. When we look at teams just ranked below them, they probably have a better resume. I said this last week. If you look at both losses, Penn State's loss is definitely way more impressive than Texas's loss. And then you look at BYU. BYU's got probably better wins than Texas does. Texas's best win right now is at Vanderbilt. So outside of that, I mean, I really don't have too many complaints on this. It's all going to be figured out and all going to be settled. My question is, I think we might have some chaos in a week. If Tennessee goes out there and loses to Georgia, I mean, who gets left out? Because now you got a Tennessee team who beat Alabama. Alabama beat Georgia. but then Georgia beats Tennessee. So I don't know which one you leave out on that. Maybe it depends on how that game goes. If Tennessee gets completely blown out, maybe Tennessee is the team that's on the outside looking in.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's worth noting that that's probably going to happen considering that Georgia are 10-point favorites. So, and not to mention, this is a spot where Kirby Smart, like, he's great at playing the disrespect card, which is exactly what he did in Texas against Texas. I agree with you on Texas. They're an SEC team with one loss, which is why they're ranked so high. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the full when you really like analyze their schedule, their resume is not great. None of their wins are against ranked. They don't have any wins against ranked teams. And the one game that they played against a ranked team, Georgia, they end up getting physically dominated in their own stadium. Yeah, you're right about that. I think Texas is a bit overrated.
Yeah.
I mean, the SEC, the committee is just in a really bad position, I would say. But here's what I'll say with Georgia. It's like what you were saying about them getting it right with Georgia being at 12. Realistically, I think that there's a few things. Realistically, I don't think Georgia's the 12th best team in the country. I think they're definitely higher than that. Realistically, they are. Even though they struggled, they're not the 12th best team in the country. If they played many of the teams in a head-to-head matchup that are ranked ahead of them, they would be favored, possibly even by double digits. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend Georgia's actually should be ranked 12. I think that's a huge overreaction. The other thing is, Anthony, you were bringing up all of these problems that Georgia was having, which is kind of why they're ranked 12th. And I don't disagree with you at all. It's a good point. But why didn't they think of this last week when they were ranked number 3? Like, I don't understand that at all. So it took them losing to Ole Miss. I think part of the reason they may have been ranked,
I guess.
Right. Well, here's the thing. My view is it looks like they were ranked 3 last week because they predicted that they would just beat Ole Miss kind of easily. That's kind of my line of thinking. But you're right. The SEC this year is a mind fuck. It is just a mind fuck because you can't really make an argument for who the best team is. It's impossible to make an argument that doesn't have a huge hole in it. Like, there's no right answers. It's like, well, you can't really say Texas because even though they're 8-1, their resume is not very good and their schedule hasn't been very strong. And the toughest team they did play, Georgia, they physically dominated them in their own stadium. Well, you obviously can't say Georgia because then they just got beat bad by Ole Miss and they lost to Alabama. You can't really say Alabama because they have a loss to Tennessee. And you can't say Tennessee either. And you're probably not going to be able to say Tennessee either because, first of all, they've struggled a lot this season. Mm-hmm. They have a loss to Arkansas. And assuming they lose to Georgia, well, you can't really say they're the best team either. So there's no right answer that really makes sense with the SEC this year. And it's putting the committee in a really bad position, I think, very obviously.
Yeah. I saw this scenario not that long. I'm sure you guys have seen the same thing, but the SEC could potentially have 5 or even 6 teams that finish 10-2 at this point in the season. And it's genuinely realistic that could happen. And that it looks like in that case that the Texas A&M Texas game would potentially be a play-in to Atlanta. And that would set up a wild scenario. I'll kind of give my 2 cents on the rankings here. Big Ten guy, love seeing the representation for my conference in the top 5. Oregon, that's for sure. I think Oregon and Ohio State are the clear 1 and 2 at this point in the season. I think there's no problem there. I kind of tend to agree with Texas. I mean, obviously they've shown a lot of strengths in games they should win, obviously, like a lot of them. And they showed it once again, obviously, against Florida. I mean, Florida was still without DJ Lagway. So they showed it against a struggling Florida team that did not really struggle that much with Georgia, which is interesting. But
DJ Lagway played that game.
Oh, did he?
I think he did. I could be wrong. I think
I could have
or he played part of that game, I think.
Yeah, well, he did play part of it. You're right. He played part of it. My mistake. He played part of it. But still, he wasn't fully healthy. And, I mean, it looks like for the most part it was Warner who was playing mostly for Florida. But still, it was just – Texas has impressed against the teams they should when obviously, like Anthony said, their best one's Vanderbilt right now, which, I mean, I guess on the road is – actually, a decent win.
Alabama couldn't do it.
It's a decent win this year because we've seen Vandy put up some really tough fights on the road and at home. So, but I think my biggest thing is Indiana. Indiana at 5 is so interesting to me because as of right now, is their best win Michigan or Nebraska? And I can't tell.
It's Nebraska. Nebraska's their best win.
You have to say it. Just based on how they dominated them, you have to say it's Nebraska.
You have to say it's Nebraska.
Yeah.
That's their best win. And they don't really have like a great resume, is how I would put it.
We're going to find out
a lot of teams
really are.
Yeah. However, the thing is, most of the games that they were playing, they dominated. It's not like Iowa in 2015 where they were barely slipped, or Pitt earlier this year where they were undefeated, but they were like barely sliding past teams that would be like below 500.
This was their first close game of the season.
Right. That was their only close game of the season. Every other game they dominated. And I think that there is something to say about that.
There is.
Which is that they're dominating their competition. I mean, you look at a team like Miami, and they're not – I mean, and we'll get to them.
They should have dropped
we all saw this coming with Miami. But Miami this year, they were ranked 4 last week just because they were undefeated, and they barely were getting into shootouts against a lot of –
They were going to lose at some point. They were going to lose
a lot of below-average teams. They needed a 25-point comeback to beat Cal. They were very lucky to beat Virginia Tech. They were lucky to beat Duke. I mean, all of these games were very, very close, and these teams were very mediocre in a weak conference. And Miami was ranked 4, but Indiana was ranked 8 just because they didn't have any ranked wins. It didn't make any sense to me.
No.
The reason Indiana moved up is really because Georgia and Miami both lost.
In a sense, yeah.
And so they moved up. That opened up spots for them. That's kind of how it works a lot. I don't think it necessarily means the committee changed their mind about Indiana, though it is interesting that Indiana and BYU both moved up a few spots after their worst performances.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of interesting.
Maybe both teams needed a performance like that, though, because Indiana, like, they hadn't really been tested. BYU hasn't been tested since they beat SMU, obviously. I mean, in a sense, really. I mean, they've had some close ones, but since they beat SMU, which, by the way, that's looking like a great win right now. Because
it really is a great
win. In my opinion, I think SMU got screwed this week. I really do. I think they should be ranked higher than Miami right now. And I think that them getting left out of the playoff right now makes no sense based off what they said, because isn't it the best team in the conference at the moment that should be in? Why is that Miami? SMU is undefeated in conference play right now.
Well, the way the rankings work, I don't think it has to be that exactly, but I do know there are like qualifiers for whoever. First of all, the ACC.
Miami is still rated as the conference champion. They have a bye right now.
Yeah. Well, the thing is,
the SMU, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's true. Well, they automatically get the 4 seed, I would say, or the 3 or 4 seed if they win the conference. Is how it would work. That's totally true. I mean, the ACC, they're only getting 1 team. The ACC can only realistically get 1 team.
Big 12 still could get 2, but I think the ACC is going to be the biggest loser.
There's no way the Big 12 could get 2.
Here's what I think. I think if BYU doesn't win the Big 12 and they finish 12-1, can you really leave them out? Can you?
Yes.
Can you really leave you think so?
I think you can. I don't think their schedule has been strong enough for you to say that they can't be left out if they don't win the conference. I think you absolutely can leave them out. I'm not saying, because the problem is that, like, when you look at the competition they're going up against, you're going to end up having like 4 SEC teams that are like 10-2, and many of those SEC teams are going to be really difficult to leave out.
True.
I don't think BYU's schedule is strong enough for you to say that they can not win the Big 12 and still get in. And we were talking about the performance against Utah and Indiana. Almost, I mean, you were saying that they haven't been tested, Indiana. I will say, and I've been a pretty ardent defender of Indiana, I wouldn't say Michigan this year is really much of a test.
I mean, my Illini beat them pretty handily, so I'm not too sure I can call them a test.
Yeah, I mean, they're not that much of a test. I mean, Nebraska, they're not much more of a test than Nebraska, and they beat Nebraska by a very big margin, which I think it was a much more impressive win than beating Michigan by 2 points. Although the thing with BYU is their schedule hasn't been that strong, and they were kind of tested against Utah, and Utah's not a good team. Zach Wilson's brother is their
rivalry game, though. I mean, it's a rivalry game. Like,
I was just gonna say, it's a rivalry game, and rivalry games are always close. Yeah. And I'll say, like, proof of this is the Iron Bowl. How many years is Alabama so much better than Auburn, but the game is very close? I mean, just 2 years ago, or actually, no, last year, it was a perfect example. 3 years ago is another great example where Auburn plays Alabama very close. It was also a road game for BYU, and that just makes it more difficult. But yeah, I just thought it was kind of because they're in sort of similar positions. The difference is Indiana doesn't have to win the Big Ten because they play Ohio State. But if BYU doesn't win the Big 12, I don't understand how you can make a case for them. Like if they end up losing to Colorado, I mean, okay, so you're going to have 2 Big 12 teams. What 2 SEC teams are you leaving out? That makes it even worse. I mean, unless you have a really good argument for like maybe if Indiana really lays an egg against Ohio State, maybe you can make that case. Maybe if Penn State somehow loses, but I don't see Penn State losing at all. I don't think Indiana will get blown out. I think they'll at least show up. That would be really difficult. That just wouldn't make any sense to me. I think the same thing with the ACC. Same thing with the ACC. If you don't win the ACC and you're an ACC team, there is no way you're getting in.
Oh, yeah. No, the ACC is getting only one team for sure. Yeah.
Well, the Big 12 is arguably weaker than the ACC.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. I think there's going to be one team, and then we were just speaking about all these SEC teams. If Georgia definitely goes out there and beats Tennessee, and we got all these 10-2 SEC teams, there's not going to be an extra Big 12 team or ACC team. And I'll even go a step further, just like you said, Nick. If Indiana goes out there and gets absolutely blown out by Ohio State, while also struggling against Michigan, I know they would only be a 1-loss team, but they won't be playing in a conference championship game. They'll have 2 losses, or they'll have 1 loss. Are they necessarily better than those 2-loss SEC teams? I mean, I think at a neutral field, I think we'd pick those SEC teams to beat Indiana.
That's certainly true. I mean, look, when it comes to it is worth noting when you look at the new 12-team playoff, it's not going to be the same formula exactly that they had for the 4-team playoff because you're picking a much bigger pool. And it's going to be harder for the committee to justify it. And I'll say the truth is that it's a mix. How they actually pick these teams is just sort of a mix of a bunch of things. It's not just who they think will win, but also their resume. But, who you think will win has a lot to do with it, too. And, do I think Indiana would beat Ole Miss in a game? Probably not, but I think they could.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it'll have a lot to do with style points. And here's the thing. Right now, Indiana is ranked 5. They're playing Ohio. Would a loss to Ohio State really drop them down more than 7 spots? Like that I find a little hard to believe.
It depends how they get beat, I think. I mean, like we've been talking about, if they just get blown out, then we got to kind of put a question mark. It's like, okay, this team can beat the teams, I guess they're supposed to, but they can't compete with the big boys. So are we supposed to really have a conversation for them still being in, considering they won't be a conference champion? And at that point, it's like, well, why don't you give them like the 9, 10, or 11 seats that have to go on the road?
Right.
Because in my opinion, I think if you go 11-1, that is such a hard record to want to leave out of a 12-team playoff field. And I get the whole SEC bias. I really do. And more than likely, those teams are probably better than Indiana. But at the same time, we got to realize there's something to be said about what they've been doing with these blowout victories we've been talking about. There's something to be said about that for sure. So we'll find out on Saturday if you will.
It's worth noting most teams can't do that.
No,
exactly. We look at a team like USC, for instance, who had high expectations going into the season. Well, how did that work out for them? They can't play. They can't beat mediocre teams on the road. Miami, they couldn't do it. So all sorts of teams can't do it. So that's why I give Indiana some credit because I think they're actually a pretty good team. I do think SEC bias. People talk about SEC bias. All humans operate on bias to some degree. So it's not totally unplausible. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that there is some SEC bias. Although, to be honest with you, for the most part, I think it is very overstated. I think the SEC is just a really good conference.
It is.
And that's really just all it is. They just happen to be a good conference, and the committee knows it. The SEC this year, you're right. There are 6. Well, yeah, we could end up with 6 10-2 teams. Mm-hmm. Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. All 6 of them. Now, if Texas goes 10-2, they're out. Like they're the first team out. But the real question I have is, what is the SEC championship game in that scenario?
Texas A&M plays someone. It'd probably be Ole Miss.
Would it be Ole Miss?
I think so.
But they have 2 loss. They're a 2-loss SEC team.
Right.
Georgia would be a 2-loss SEC team. So would Alabama. So would Tennessee. They don't all play each other.
Wouldn't Tennessee be a 3-loss team at that point? Oh, wait, never mind. They'd only have a loss to Georgia.
They didn't lose to Georgia yet.
Right.
So
you're saying in this scenario, there's 10-2 teams, right?
Texas
A&M would for sure be one of them. Texas A&M would absolutely be one of them because they'd only have 1 loss in SEC play.
Right. Texas A&M would be in the championship game. But because if for some odd reason Texas has the tiebreak, which I think the way it works is like in the NFL, like the tie breaks in the NFL. If Texas has the tiebreak and they go to the SEC championship game, and then they beat Texas A&M, well, that would probably knock out Texas A&M.
Probably,
I would say.
I mean, this whole SEC thing.
Well, I don't know if you can even justify that fully.
Yeah, this whole SEC thing is going to be so fascinating on the stretch. I mean, because Ole Miss is going to win its final 2 games. It plays Florida and Mississippi State. They're going to win those final 2 games. Tennessee, I'm going to probably write in a loss for them. I don't think they're going to beat Georgia. I'm not very highly sold on Tennessee right now.
I'm not either. I think their offense hasn't clicked.
Yeah, I think Nico needs a little bit more time to really kind of get the feel of college football. And so, I know he's played like 9 games now at this point, but it's still just not a very fluid offense. It's not.
Well, yeah, he put up really great numbers against crappy teams. And
exactly.
People were like freaking out.
SEC play, then
then when he got to the SEC, he played a good half against Alabama, if that.
Yeah. The defense in that game.
Well, the thing is, if Texas loses to Texas A&M and if they're not in the conference championship game, then Texas is just out because their schedule has not been strong enough to justify them getting into the playoffs.
I think it'd be hard to. I think it'd be hard to put a 10-2 Texas in, especially if they're not a conference champion. Like, I think if you're looking at Texas or you're even looking at, I will say that 10-2, because obviously 4 teams, if there are 6, won't go to the conference title game that have 2 losses. So at that point, like, it's kind of hard to imagine. I mean, let's say Tennessee goes 10-2 and is somehow the other team that makes it. Like, I feel like if you're Tennessee, you have to win the SEC championship at this point to probably go to the playoff.
So you're saying that of the 5, because like I said, if the only question I have is if there's 6 10-2 SEC teams, if Texas loses to A&M, even though Texas probably should be out at that point, if they end up having all the tiebreakers and going to the conference championship, which none of us really know how that works exactly. I assume it's probably like common opponents because all of those teams haven't played each other, so you can't do head to head.
I'm pretty sure regardless, Texas A&M Texas is going to be a playing game.
Yes.
I think regardless it's going to be.
I think it would be. Well,
if records stand, of course.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a play-in game as much as it would be like an elimination game, but I don't think
the winner playing to the SEC championship.
Right. I don't think that if Texas were to win that game, they're probably in the playoff. I would 99%.
I think so too, because that would be the marquee win they need, and it's on the road. So
right. But with A&M, even if A&M were to win that game, I don't think it's a guarantee because they already have 2 losses.
Yeah.
So if they were to lose in the conference championship game, it would be kind of hard to justify putting them in.
I mean, they got embarrassed on their own home field they beat LSU
on the road
field. Sorry, yeah,
against South Carolina.
Yeah, they got embarrassed on the road against South Carolina. That's what it was. I got the games mixed up. Yeah.
Well, they could have. The way the game against LSU was going, that certainly could have happened. But then Nussmeier.
But now I'm not too sure. We're not really too sure how good LSU actually is now at this point. So
LSU is doing ever since Brian Kelly's been the head coach at LSU, the trajectory of their seasons has been the same. What happens is the start of the season, they lose a non-conference game to a fairly decent opponent.
Not anymore.
I would say, well, yeah, I know.
20, but yeah.
But at the same time, I will say it's kind of like when Utah lost to Florida on the road in week 1. It's like, Florida totally unraveled later in the season, but at that point, it's not such a bad game. It's not such a bad loss. The same thing with LSU and USC. Like if LSU played USC now, LSU would be like 10-point favorites probably. But at the time, it wasn't such a bad loss. And then they really come back and they get a lot better. And then they end up blowing that game against Texas A&M. And it's just like, right around like late October, LSU always seems to go downhill again. And it's very similar to what happened 2 years ago, I would say. Like when they lost to Florida State, they end up beating Alabama. And then at the end of the year, they lose to Texas A&M. It was horrible that year. So it seems like LSU has the same trajectory of their seasons. It seems like, but no, LSU is out. LSU is out. There is no 3-loss team that can make it. And there will be a 10-2 team that will be left out. And
Absolutely.
How does the committee justify it? Because there's no good answer. And
I think it has to be strength of schedule. I mean, I think it has to be strength of schedule and strength of resume. I think it has to be.
Realistic strength of schedule or like this mathematical strength of schedule? Because the problem with the mathematical strength of schedule argument is that it doesn't take into account certain nuances and say a quarterback is injured or something like that. Like it doesn't take that into account. It's all like this weird mathematical crap where it's just like, I'm not one to look at strength, like the mathematical sense of strength of schedule, as opposed to like thinking it through and looking at it realistically. Now, I did think about this for a while and for a long, hard time. And I'll tell you, I think if anybody gets left out, it's Tennessee, most likely. And I think that's what I think it would unless Texas loses to Texas A&M, that's the most justifiable position for the committee to take because their resume, Alabama has a win against Georgia. Georgia, I mean, I know they have 2 losses, and we're talking about how they were struggling a lot, but they did physically dominate Texas, and they're
on the road.
Yeah, on the road. So it's a little hard to leave out Georgia, especially when Texas probably isn't even any better than Georgia. Texas just played an easier schedule. And so it would be hard to justify that. And, it would be hard to justify leaving out Alabama if Georgia's in because they have a win against Georgia. And it's like, I think that the only good answer is to leave out Tennessee. I think that's just how I see it.
Yeah. They just haven't really impressed that much. I mean, I get it. You beat Alabama. That's impressive in itself. Sure. But at that time, and I'm sure you guys can agree with me on this, Alabama was not playing nearly as good as they are now. No. I think Alabama is playing much better football right now than they were when they lost to Tennessee.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't think that, look, I think Georgia's a better team than Alabama, just because Alabama beat them. I also think Alabama's a better team than Tennessee, just because Tennessee just beat them. And I know Tennessee fans will cry bloody murder about that, but the fact is that you can't have rankings. The rankings for Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama, and I guess Texas too, if you want to put that in there too, is it can't be in order of who beats who because Texas, assuming Georgia beats Tennessee, it would in this scenario, Georgia would have beaten Tennessee, Tennessee would have beaten Alabama, and Alabama would have beaten Georgia. It all goes around in a circle. So there wouldn't really be a perfect answer in that scenario. The SEC this year is just a massive mind fuck, is how I would put it. It's a massive mind fuck.
It's fun chaos, though. It's fun
chaos. It is, but the committee's going to have a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
The committee's going to have a lot to answer for because,
in a sense, I really am hoping for this 16-team 10-2 scenario. I really am. I want to see how they would handle this.
Well, here's the thing. It really depends on the tiebreak scenario because if Texas is not in the SEC championship game, there is no way you can justify Texas being in the playoff under that scenario. Yeah. They would have to win the conference if they were to lose 2 games. And that entirely depends on the tiebreakers, which I don't know if any of us or even most SEC fans even would know off the top of their heads. Like that would just seem impossible to me.
Maybe wins against common opponents or something like that. Like, I don't even know.
Which, by the way, it's like, oh my God. I mean, in the NFL, it's one thing to have that, but in college football, it's like you don't want to have that. Like that is. But look, going back to the ACC, what do they do in the ACC? between Miami and Clemson don't play each other this year. So who gets in between the two of them into the ACC championship game, assuming they both finish 11-1 in the regular or in ACC play 7-1.
Right.
What happens then? So it's just they don't even play each other. It's just based on this tiebreaker, and then one of them goes to play SMU, which is probably what's going to happen.
More than likely.
Yeah. Like, how does that work? That, I think, is just – I mean, look.
I have no clue.
I am not shedding any tears for Miami or Texas. They both kind of deserve it a little bit from losing those terrible games. I mean,
Miami should have dropped further. I know.
Dude, Miami's been playing with fire all season.
Yeah.
All season it's been going on, and this was bound to happen at some point. I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. Wait, I do want to talk a bit about Georgia losing to Ole Miss, 28-10. And I'll tell you, I didn't see this happening. The reason I didn't see this happening is because Georgia, for many years, has been the type of team to struggle, especially this year, to struggle against mediocre opponents and really show up for the tough opponent. You know what I mean? Like they showed up against Texas, but they didn't show up against Kentucky or Florida or Mississippi State, and they were terrible in those games. But somehow they're really good against the good opponent. And Ole Miss tends to blow these games a lot.
Yep.
They really tend to blow these games like they did against LSU. And credit to Ole Miss. I think they did a great job. And the one touchdown Georgia scored was on short field. I think there is something wrong with Georgia's offense right now.
There is.
And it's not just about Carson Beck. They can't move the ball.
No.
They can't move the ball. And by the way, the reason they were able to beat Texas by such a big margin is because in the first half, they kept getting the ball in like the red zone. And even when they did get the ball in Texas territory, they didn't move the ball very well. So it was really Georgia's defense just forcing a bunch of turnovers that were and Carson Beck did not play a good game. And Carson Beck has not been good. And it is a real concern for Georgia. And it's been turning the ball over a lot. The difference is I think turning the ball over is a fixable thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think that when quarterbacks throw interceptions, especially in college, you can kind of fix that to an extent. But they also don't have playmakers on offense. Like they don't have playmakers on the outside like they used to. And they haven't recovered from losing Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. They haven't recovered. And this Ole Miss team is very good. Even though, like, this Ole Miss team should be 11-1, should be a one-loss team. They blew that game against LSU. They threw it away with both hands. That was a killer, that loss to LSU. They absolutely should have won that game, and that would have given them a tremendous resume. They'd probably be ranked ahead of Texas, actually. They'd be ranked ahead of Texas. They'd be like ranked probably number 3 if they had won that game.
I think so.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, Carson Beck, he's a quarterback that if you have the players around him, he could be a good distributor of the football. He could be smart, make good decisions, but he's not going to be a quarterback that you could put the whole offense on his shoulder and overcome. And you said, Nick, that Georgia's the type of team that step up in these big games. Well, it's usually just been their defense playing superhuman, and they weren't able to do it in this game. But we got to give Ole Miss credit. Their pass rush has been absolutely insane this season. Perkins, Princely, Jared Ivey, they've been rushing the quarterback. They may even either lead all college football in sacks or they're definitely near the top. They got great defensive tackles as well with Walter Nolan and Xavier Harris. So they've been giving quarterbacks fits. What their issue has been their secondary. Now with Trey Amos becoming a good, decent number 1 corner, their defense is stepping up. Obviously, Trey Harris has been their number 1 option, but we see guys like Jordan Watkins and Lee stepping up around him. So it's not just one guy on offense. We even seen Austin Simmons, the young freshman quarterback, step in and go 5 for 6. So this Ole Miss team seems to be clicking on both sides of the ball. And I've been really, really impressed with Ole Miss. And I know they have a couple bad losses, but right now they may be the one team in the SEC that may be the most scariest and maybe the team that you want to play the least right now. It was a great win for Lane Kiffin. I know he's struggled against top 5 opponents, so that was great for him to go out there and prove to the country that he can beat the best of the best. But for Georgia, man, this was a tough loss. Like I said, they've been struggling on offense, and I really don't see how they could get their offense fixed. They're just going to have to hope that their defense can play superhuman. And most of the time, the last few years, they've been able to win that way. But I don't think offensively they're going to be able to fix it this year.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so either. I think that you kind of nailed it, Anthony. It's just Carson Beck. I mean, obviously coming into this season, I mean, he was supposed to be, I'm not going to say the best quarterback in the country, but he was supposed to be a Heisman contender. Who's supposed to be like, I mean, and he is the exact opposite right now. I mean, the thing is, like, Georgia has been, and again, credit to Ole Miss's defense. They played incredibly impressive and have played incredibly impressive this whole season. But just the way that Georgia has been playing lately and the way that Carson Beck has been throwing the football, are Georgia fans like a little concerned? Like if they do make the playoff as a 10-2 team, like that if they get a bad matchup, they're going to be bounced immediately? Because I kind of would be if I was a Georgia fan. I mean, you're not seeing consistent quarterback play right now. You're not. And that would scare me. Like Carson Beck has been, like, granted, he was 20 for 31. Like that's not awful. It's not great, but it's not awful. But the questionable decisions he's been making in these past few games, just like, what is going on here? And like, granted, I know that Georgia's had a hard time filling in the holes of Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. Those are obviously huge holes to fill. But at the same time, it's like, you're Georgia. You're supposed to have the next guy in line. You're supposed to have the next guy in line you can fill in immediately. And that just hasn't been the case this year. So look, they're still in a fine position. Like, obviously losing this game on the road isn't going to kill your resume, but in back of my mind, I'm wondering, because this game, even though it was close for a little bit, it really never was. This game was never really even that close. Like the score was
the one touchdown they scored was on short field.
Exactly.
They got an interception like the first drive, and that was the only touchdown they scored.
This is why this game's so confusing to me, because Ole Miss just straight up dominated this game. And Ole Miss is a very, very good football team. They're a very good football team. And they proved that this weekend by dominating Georgia. Like, you got the job done at home. Like, there you go. The one thing that I think I'm going to draw from this is that I think Ole Miss is a lot better than I'm not going to say a lot better. I think Ole Miss is as good as people thought they were going to be this year. Like, because they came into the season highly rated, and I think they're just about that. They had that loss to LSU, and obviously the blunder at home against Kentucky, but college football happens. Will it hurt them in the long stretch this season? Probably not, because like I mentioned, their final two games are against Florida and Mississippi State. Those should be 2 wins, but I don't know. I think that right now, this game, once again, just made that SEC race just made it so confusing now. But yeah, I think Ole Miss is a lot better, is as good as people thought they were. And I think Georgia fans have a bit of good reason for concern right now.
Well, if Georgia had won the game like everybody expected, I mean, it's just an easy decision for the committee.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, Ole Miss is
out to win there. They're ready.
Yeah, pretty much. And the thing is, if you're a Georgia fan, the thing I think what the committee is doing is Georgia has to kind of prove that they can beat Tennessee in order to move up in the rankings, which I think, if anything, it should be the other way around, because Tennessee is much more likely to lose that game than Georgia is.
Both teams need to prove they can beat the other one right now. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what I'm saying is that I think the committee, they're saying that in order to move up, Georgia has to beat Tennessee. And the thing is, Georgia, if you think about it, even though if the rankings were right now, they would be the first team out, because Boise State is not in the top 12, and there's an at-large bid. And so Georgia would be the first team out. But if they beat Tennessee, well, assuming they win out, it's like, even if they don't make the SEC championship game, in what scenario do they get bumped? You know what I mean? Like if they beat Tennessee. Yeah,
that win against Texas is going to hold them so highly. And obviously you're going to have a top 10 win at the time against Tennessee. So they're going to be in. They'll be in.
Yeah, and will be in. And even if Texas ends up losing to Texas A&M and that win against Texas doesn't look as good as it once did, well, that kind of knocks out Texas. It kind of knocks Texas out of contention. And no matter what happens, I think I would be sort of stunned if Georgia doesn't end up making it.
I agree.
After a loss like this,
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'd still be kind of stunned if it was just. Yeah, they've struggled a lot, and I just didn't think that they would struggle like this against Ole Miss. Like I thought that it would just.
Surprising.
Yeah,
I predicted it last week. I think me
You
and
were
Johnny
right.
were on it. We said that Carson Beck was struggling. This Ole Miss was playing for their playoff lives, and that defense and that pass rush were just a bad recipe with Carson Beck's turnovers.
Yeah,
All know
yeah,
it.
and it looks like it's a problem that can't be fixed. Like this, not that it can't be fixed. It can be fixed, but it hasn't been. It's been happening over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Alabama, they destroyed LSU.
This
I
was
didn't.
shocking,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Well, it's not shocking that they won and covered. It
No,
is shocking that they won by such a big margin.
Yes.
Is how I would put it. The thing is, the problem with LSU is, and Garrett Nussmeier is a good quarterback, but you don't know what Garrett Nussmeier you're going to get. Are you going to get the Garrett Nussmeier in the second half against Texas A&M or the Garrett Nussmeier in the fourth quarter against Ole Miss? You don't know which one you're going to get. And LSU's offense did not look good. And I'll give Alabama's defense a bit of credit because Alabama's defense has certainly taken a step back under Kalen DeBoer this year, and they usually give up a lot of points, Alabama, and I don't think that's going to end. But I got to give it is a good sign for Alabama. The other thing is against like mobile quarterbacks, LSU gives up so much. They give up a lot of points against mobile quarterbacks. It seems like
They sure do.
like they did the same thing against Lenora Sellers. And by the way, if Lenora Sellers doesn't get hurt in that LSU South Carolina game, South Carolina probably wins that game. They had to put in their backup. What's his name? Robbie. He was at Auburn.
Robbie Ashford.
Robbie Ashford. That's right.
Yeah,
They had to put in Robbie Ashford, and he doesn't even throw. And LSU barely was able to win that game. So they do struggle a lot against these running quarterbacks. It seems like LSU.
Yeah, they also struggled against Marcel Reed.
Yeah, well, he's also a running quarterback, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their defense, like there's just a lot of question marks about LSU's defense. But this loss ultimately brought LSU to irrelevancy. Now that they're a 3-loss team, I mean, sure, it's a very good win against Ole Miss, but they're completely out. Like this game completely knocks LSU out of any.
Especially the way they lost too. Like
the way they lost.
It just shows because like you got trounced by Texas A&M on the road, and then you just get absolutely annihilated at home by a team that I'm not going to say you should beat, but by a team that you could beat.
Yeah.
It's Alabama. Like I mentioned earlier, I think they're starting to kind of get rolling a little bit because obviously their last game was that huge blowout win over Missouri. Like I know Missouri's not that good, but like still, like that was the last 2 wins for Alabama have been like, all right, this is Alabama.
Well, they've shown sparks is how I would put it. They've shown sparks, but they've also shown a lot of weakness.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For LSU, this is very disappointing. I mean, this is the second year in a row for Brian Kelly where he can't fix the defense. I mean, you literally had Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Bryant Thomas Jr., who are literally lighting up grown men in the National Football League. You had them all on the same roster, and you went 9-3. And now your defense is equally as bad. Last year, their pass defense was bad. Their pass defense is actually not bad this year. Their corners are better. Their pass rush is better. But now it's the run defense. And Garrett Nussmeier is obviously not Jaden Daniels. And again, just like Carson Beck, he's not a quarterback that could carry a team. He has no help. LSU has no running game. They're relying on a freshman that's not really helping them too much. Their offensive line does have Will Campbell, but outside of that, their offensive line has struggled. So you combine with a struggling defense, a struggling running game, and a quarterback that's obviously going to try to force passes and turn the ball over. I mean, that's why LSU was out of the playoffs. And for Alabama, their defense has definitely stepped up. Jahad Campbell, you can make an argument he was the MVP of the game outside of Jalen Melrose. Him and Deontay Lawson, the linebacking core for Alabama, completely was taking over this game. I think for LSU, the one thing I can say is maybe the reason why they are struggling against mobile quarterbacks is because of the loss of Harold Perkins. Harold Perkins was one of the top linebackers in all of college football, super athletic, and he could have been the quarterback spy in a lot of these games. Obviously, they lost him to a torn ACL, and I think that's been a devastating loss. But either way, you're LSU. You're supposed to have the depth to replace guys to at least be able to contribute a little bit. And so far, the Brian Kelly era continues just to be the same as it always was.
Yeah. I guess sort of similar to what it was at Notre Dame, the Brian Kelly era.
Yeah.
Not,
Can't win big games. They can get
you're
there.
not being,
Can't win
not
the big
being able
game.
to win the big game.
Mm-hmm.
Can't win the big game. I guess is how I would put it with Brian Kelly. I mean, look, I guess it's better than some of the other LSU eras we've seen. we've seen some pretty bad LSU teams throughout the years. Georgia Tech upsets Miami 28-23.
Finally.
We kind of talked about this a little bit. I don't think it took a genius to figure out that Miami was going to step on a landmine at some point. Miami has been playing with fire all season. They've been playing with fire. They were very fortunate to beat Virginia Tech. They were very fortunate to beat Cal with a 25-point comeback. Unbelievable they were able to win that game. They get into shootouts against every team, it seems like. They get into shootouts against everybody. In fact, I said they're sort of similar to Alabama, but now I think Alabama's substantially better, it looks like, from what I've seen from them. And Miami, like, they've really been, like I said, they've been playing with fire. They've been barely able to beat and getting into shootouts against these mediocre teams, and they're one-dimensional. They are very one-dimensional. They are very reliant on Cam Ward. He always throws the ball a lot. He is a Heisman contender. He's great, but they're one-dimensional. They can play offense, but they can't play defense. Their defense stinks.
Yep.
Yeah, I think after all these close games, I think they got a little too complacent. I think they got used to playing bad early on and thinking, okay, well, Cam Ward will save us at the end, or our defense will make at least one play. In this game, it didn't. I know Cam Ward obviously had the fumble at the end, but I'm not putting any blame on him. I mean, him and Restrepo have been doing everything they can to carry this Miami team, and this Miami defense hasn't been doing them any favors. They should have more losses, like you guys said. And I think the key stat here is over 270 rushing yards. That's what Georgia Tech did. I mean, you had an injured Haynes King who couldn't throw the ball, and you had a young quarterback, and he couldn't throw the ball. So you literally knew they were going to run the ball at you, and you couldn't stop it. You knew they were going to run it, and you couldn't stop it. So Miami, they deserve to lose. If you are going to let someone play in your wheelhouse, you deserve to lose. And honestly, you guys, I think Will maybe mentioned it earlier. SMU probably at this point has a better resume than Miami. I mean, both teams' best win is against Louisville, the same team, but one team's loss is against BYU, and the other team's loss is against Georgia Tech. So, I mean, Miami, it's going to be tough. Obviously, they still control their own destiny, but I'm glad that they fall. I think maybe they could even fall a few more spots in the rankings, but this was just bound to happen. It should have actually happened against Cal, but it happened against Georgia Tech. And, kudos to Georgia Tech for coming in there and being able to run the ball and we'll come out with the win.
Yeah, Georgia Tech ran the ball down Miami's throats. Miami couldn't stop a nosebleed in that game.
Like, how do you not plan for the run in that game? It just makes no sense. Like, that's all Georgia Tech was going to be able to do. All they were going to be able to do. I mean,
yeah, they only threw with their backup quarterback, basically.
And he threw it 6 times.
Yeah.
Or, sorry, no, he threw it 10 times. I was looking at Haynes King's stat there. He threw it 10 times.
Yeah, imagine getting burned by a one-dimensional offense.
That's Miami's defense. I mean, that's the Miami defense.
They're not one-dimensional. Their defense. They're like no-dimensional. Miami's defense. They can't stop anything.
How do you let a Georgia Tech team do that? I mean, I get if Haynes King can throw the ball, but he literally couldn't. I mean,
he couldn't.
Like
Haynes King ran all over Miami.
Yes.
I can't count the number of explosive plays Miami gave up.
270 rushing yards. I mean, look, it was about time Miami lost the game. Like, I know he said that, but it was about time. And Anthony, I'll go back to your point one second. I don't know if they do control their own destiny. I don't know if they do. Because like we were talking about, like, what happens at the tiebreaker with them and Clemson at this point? Because, like, if let's say Miami ends up finishing the year 11-1, but they don't have the tiebreaker over Clemson, however that would work out. Are they in? Because I don't think they are. I don't know.
Clemson owns the tiebreaker or would Miami?
They don't win the conference?
Yeah, I'm saying, like, let's say Clemson holds a tiebreaker over them and Clemson goes to play SMU. I don't think Miami's in.
No way. They're in.
No, they're definitely not in.
Yeah. And that's a genuine possibility now that this loss happened because Miami was going to lose a game at some point, and they allowed Georgia Tech to do the one thing Georgia Tech does better than a lot of teams in the country, run the ball. And because Miami didn't plan for that, ta-da, you have a loss. You finally have a 1 in the loss column. And it finally showed up Like, look, I will not describe Miami's offense at all. It had a down game. Miami's offense has been phenomenal this whole year. It had a down game. Cam Ward still had 340 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. But at the end of the day, is that going to win you every game? No, it won't. It won't.
No.
And it didn't win this one.
Well, all right. So you're questioning the standings. All right. So I'm looking at the standings now. It says SMU is 1, Clemson 2, Miami 3.
Okay.
I don't know why, like what the tiebreaker is, because it could
Right.
change in the next couple of weeks. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But if it stays that way, Miami's not in. There's no way you can justify Miami being a playoff team.
And you know what's interesting about this too is that Georgia Tech lost to Louisville, Clemson lost to Louisville, but Miami beat Louisville. So this creates like a huge triangle of confusion.
That might be it.
Because now Georgia Tech beat Miami.
So I see what you're saying.
This creates this huge triangle. Like, what is the scenario here? Because
I guess it's common opponents. That's the only thing
I have no idea. Because I would say that if Georgia Tech beat Louisville, then obviously this loss seems a bit more in Miami's favor. But that didn't happen.
Right. Right. I see what you're saying. I think it's probably common opponents. I'm just not 100% sure.
Yeah.
I just think if you got the same conference record, they should go by your overall record. And since Miami has 1 loss, I mean, it should just be obvious that they should get over Clemson. But obviously, they don't make it work that easy.
That's not fair, though. That's not fair because it's not within the conference.
Miami
and also
Georgia.
Well, right, exactly. You control your own schedule. So Clemson goes out and plays Georgia. Who did Miami play in the non-conference?
Well, Miami beat Louisville, just like you guys said. Who beat Clemson?
No, in the non-conference, though, they beat Florida. And that's a much tougher game than Georgia. I mean, a much easier game than Georgia. So it's not exactly fair it wouldn't be fair if they looked at non-conference because you control that yourself. You would just be incentivizing teams to schedule cupcakes in the non-conference in case something like scenario like this happens. So it's not that at all. But look, if Miami were to be left out to that, I'd say too bad because they just weren't good enough. I would say it's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, imagine seeing SMU, Indiana, and BYU in the playoff this year, which is very likely to happen. Speaking of BYU,
I saw some of that in 2016, huh?
Yeah, BYU, very fortunate to beat Utah. I watched a lot of this game. I can't believe BYU ended up winning. They were struggling to move the ball the whole game, basically. But the notable thing to me about this game is the call.
Yeah.
The call, the holding call that ended up BYU was, I mean, first, for those of you who don't know, BYU, Jake Retzlaff was sacked in the end zone, would have been a safety, and Utah would have had a 5-point lead, and they basically almost, I mean, that's probably the game right there. That's probably the game right there if Utah gets the safety. Because they called a holding, a very questionable holding call. Now, I saw it happen live, and I was like, I don't know. Is that really a hold? It was kind of a 50-50 thing is how I would see it.
See, I get if they throw it on the road, but at home is what shocks me. Like, throwing that flag in a home environment that's what shocked me the most. Because, like, especially in that scenario, too, in that kind of scenario, that's what was shocking to me.
Well, the question is, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer for holding calls or pass interference calls. You just have to be consistent with it.
Yeah.
And
because they happen every play, basically, in some way, shape, or form. Holdings happen every play, whether offense or defense.
Yeah, kind of. Although I'll say it's like, I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure there was only one pass interference called the rest of that game, and it was against BYU. One pass interference called the rest of that game. If you're, look, even if you watch the entire game, and I didn't watch the entire game, I watched part of it, it would be impossible to really know because you don't see every little thing that goes on during a play. You're watching the ball, you know what I mean? But you're not watching the linemen and everything not like included in the play. So the only question is consistency. And they only called one pass interference call against in that whole game. Now, it is possible that both teams were just so disciplined enough that that type of contact wasn't happening the entire game. However, I find that very hard to believe. I don't think that's very likely. Chances are this call probably was just inconsistent with how they were calling the rest of the game. Like in basketball, a foul calls. You don't call this foul when you haven't been calling it the whole game. Mm-hmm. And now in the last minute, now all of a sudden that's a foul. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing in football. Convenient. Like to me, you have to be consistent. And the officiating in college football this year has been awful. It's been really, really bad. And that's my problem with it, which is that okay, were they calling this the whole game or are they only calling it at that point?
Yeah, Nick, and you said a 50-50 call. At that point in the game, you don't take a 50-50 call and throw the flag. I mean, I think at that point in the game, I think it's got to be almost decisive. I mean, because the game rides on that play. So if it's a 50-50 call, I mean, don't let the referees dictate the game. Let the players play it out. If it's decisive, call it. If you haven't been really calling it all night, let the players play. So I thought it was a bad call. It would have been a tremendous win for Utah and a tremendous upset. So I don't think you call that in that environment. BYU's offense struggled again. This is, 2 games now where they struggled. Utah's pass rush was really dominant in this first half. They made a quarterback change. They took out Wilson and they put Rose in, and he was completing the passes and doing really well in the first half. Obviously, BYU made the adjustments, completely shut out Utah's offense in the second half. But either way, Utah's pass rush was still getting to Jake Retzlaff the whole game, and Utah played good enough to win. And honestly, I think Utah kind of got robbed. I think Utah should have won this game, and we should be talking about a one-loss BYU team that, maybe looking on the outside, looking in the playoffs.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I'll say. Here's the thing. It's not that they shouldn't make that call in a big spot or anything like that. If it's a 50-50 call and they were calling that whole game, I say call it late in the game too. But if you weren't calling it all game, don't call it late in the game. It has to be consistent throughout. If that's a pass interference in the first quarter, it's a pass interference in the fourth quarter. And if it's not a pass interference earlier in the game, it's not a pass interference on that play.
Exactly.
That's the problem that I have with it. It is the lack of consistency. And look, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I do find it very hard to believe if they only called this one other time in the game, that type of contact was not just allowed. Because that type of contact happens a lot. I find it a little hard to believe that wasn't just allowed the rest of the game.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that. And granted, we there is something to be said once again that BYU just find ways to win games.
Yeah.
But here's the big but. We go back to the call here. Without the penalty call, they don't win this game. That's the thing. They don't. They lose by 5 points. So it's this thing that and I'm not going to get into this whole the Big 12 is going to want an undefeated team kind of deal. So they told the refs to throw the flag. No. That's stupid.
No,
but it's it's just such a different situation, obviously, for BYU right now. If the refs didn't throw that flag, because like Anthony said, they're now an 8-1 team that is currently on the outside looking in, and the Big 12 now is only for sure going to have one team.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it actually changed their position that much. I don't think it did.
It didn't, because they would still be leading the conference, obviously.
They're still in the same – I mean, even if they had lost that game, they'd be in the same position. They'd still just have to win the Big 12, and that's
exactly.
Well, wouldn't it affect them getting the first-round bye, though? Because, wouldn't that put Boise State in a position to get the bye?
I think it will.
Well,
because the 4 top conference champions get the bye. If you have the group of 5, if Boise State's ahead of the Big 12 champion, they get the bye.
No, but the four conference, the Power 4 conference champions all get a bye.
Am
I wrong about that? It's the highest conference champion ranked.
Not necessarily. This is where it gets interesting. Because let's hypothetically say Colorado ends up winning the Big 12 or something like that. I don't think you can give the bye to Colorado instead of Boise State.
It's not automatic. Am I wrong about that? It's not automatic.
Yeah, it goes to whoever's the highest ranked conference
champions.
Okay, so the group of 5 winner can still get the bye.
Yep.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So Boise State is still Boise State would have actually loved if BYU would have lost that game. They would have loved it.
Right, because then BYU could have been – well, yeah, that's a good point, actually, because BYU could have then ended up not getting the first round bye. But if they end up winning the Big 12 – and go undefeated, they're going to end up getting a first round bye.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. But yeah, to me, it's just like, I don't believe in conspiracies like that because I just think there's a lot of incompetency in officiating.
Oh yeah. 100%. Yeah.
And by the way, that the conspiracy theories like that don't make sense because how would that happen? What are they in the ref's ear like right after that play happens, or throw a flag right here? Exactly. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. Like, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if anyone out there is like a conspiracy theorist about that or something like that. But like, that's just
now Colorado and BYU and Colorado. We don't have to talk about this much. But Colorado just beat Texas Tech 41-27. That's a really good win. And Colorado is a great story this year. They really are a great story. They could be a playoff team. And from the way Colorado's been playing, I think they can beat BYU and the way they've been playing.
I do too. Yeah.
Yeah, they came back from 13 points. I mean, one thing that's been really standing out, their run defense. They shut down RJ Harvey a couple weeks ago, and I think after that they came back from that 13 points down. They were able to kind of keep Tajay Brooks in check. Their pass rush with Bijan Green has been doing really well. Obviously, you got Travis Hunter taking on the number one receiver. You got Shedeur Sanders doing his thing. The offensive line's blocking. I mean, this Colorado team has kind of fixed a lot of their, holes on their team from last year. And Colorado's ascending right now. And we talked about controlling your own destiny. Colorado's a team that if they win out, maybe they're in the playoffs.
Well, yeah, they are.
They are in the playoffs.
They are for sure. Yeah. I think that Colorado's in a great spot right now because they have seen that BYU is vulnerable. They have. I think Colorado is honestly looking at its chops right now to get past these final two games and get to BYU. I mean, I really do think they are. And obviously, they have to win these final couple games to even consider a chance at the playoff. But, I think that, or these final three games, sorry. But these final three games for Colorado should be wins. They all should be wins. I mean, it's Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. You should win those three games. And then if you're in
especially Kansas and Oklahoma State.
Yes. And I will say Kansas on the road could be a tricky one. Could be. Yeah. Could be. I don't think it will, but it could be because Kansas did look very good against Iowa State this past weekend.
That's true.
But Colorado gets to 10-2. If they win these final three games, they're going to be licking at the chops to get at BYU because I think if you put those two teams on the field right now, I'd probably pick Colorado to win the game.
I think BYU might be favored. I'm not. I don't know who would win outright exactly.
BYU would be favored by those 2.5 points they're always favored by.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, it's worth noting, like throughout Colorado's season, they only lost that one game in the Big 12 against Kansas State because Travis Hunter got hurt and didn't play the second half. Mm-hmm. And also another thing you have to look at is look at what that Hail Mary against Baylor did for their season.
Yeah.
What position would they be in right now? They'd be a 2-loss team. They'd be tied with a whole bunch of other Big 12 teams.
Yep.
And I don't know how that would work for them.
They'd already be out of the playoff contention. Well, I guess not technically. But.
No, not technically, but it would be very difficult. I mean, they're also very fortunate Iowa State kind of laid an egg. And now they're a 2-loss team, which I didn't predict happening. But that Hail Mary, in a way, saved their season. Or in a way, it's sort of like, let's say they had lost to Baylor and then beaten Kansas State. Well, I guess it sort of evens out a little bit because they should have been able to beat Kansas State, but Travis Hunter got hurt. I'm going to get into some picks. Tennessee at Georgia. Georgia is giving 10. By the way, I'm going to be in Vegas for all these games. So
nice.
I'm in Vegas for all these. So I'll be watching this at the Mandalay Bay Sportsbook. And by the way, Vegas is 3 hours behind us, so it's going to be a little weird seeing college football games end at 10 o'clock.
Oh yeah, Georgia, that's how I feel. That's how I feel around that.
Well, you're an hour ahead of Vegas.
Yes. Yes.
Georgia is giving 10. I like Georgia to cover this, to win and to cover. There's a few things. First of all, Georgia is playing at home, and nobody is better at playing the disrespect card than Kirby Smart in Georgia, coming off of a loss like that against Ole Miss. Nobody is better at that is better in these situations than Kirby Smart in Georgia. The other is I don't believe in Tennessee at all, to be honest. I really don't believe in them much at all. Their offense, they do have a very good defense, and I do think their defense will give Georgia Georgia's offense a hard time. I really do think that. But Tennessee's offense has not clicked throughout the season. It really has not clicked, and it's not going to click against Georgia. It's not going to. So give me the Georgia minus the points.
Yeah, when you look at this game, you look at Tennessee defensively with that pass rush they have, led by James Pierce Jr., McCoy at corner. Defensively, they can do what Ole Miss did, but offensively, not so much. Nico has obviously struggled. This passing game's been inconsistent. I know it's been better, over the last couple of weeks, but overall, it's been inconsistent. I know Dylan Sampson has been really the person who's been carrying this offense. He's got 20 touchdowns. He's been, the superstar of this offense. But I think that plays right into Georgia's hands. Georgia's got a really good run defense, and if your offense is just predicated on one running back, I don't see how you're going to have success against Georgia. I think because of Tennessee's defense, it's going to be a very low-scoring, sloppy defensive game. And so because of that, I think Georgia wins, but I'm going to go Georgia no cover.
I think I'm kind of right there with you. I think that it's going to be a defensive battle. And if Georgia covers, it's because Tennessee probably scores a field goal or a touchdown. That's it. Yeah. I think that it's going to be like, I could end up seeing this be like a 20-7 final score type of deal, 17-3 type of deal, because I just don't think Tennessee's going to be able to score in this one. I really don't. It's just whether or not Georgia can score themselves. And I do think that their offense will look a bit better this week. Obviously, they're going to be at home, so they'll have the home crowd behind them. But this is going to be the true test, I think, to really determine where both these teams are. I think that Tennessee, we're going to find out if Tennessee is like actually deserving of their ranking, or we're going to find out if they're completely overhyped, which I personally think that's the case. And then we're going to find out, is Georgia actually going to flip the switch and be like, okay, now we got to get rolling here because we really kind of have to finish 10-2 at this point. Or is Tennessee going to eliminate them from the playoffs? Like, the thing is, if Georgia loses this game, I don't see a way they get in at this point because they lost.
Well, I think they're so desperate. It's like they have to win this game, and they know it.
So, but generally speaking, I think this is a hard fought game that Georgia probably does end up covering. I think it's like a 20-7 final score, but the under is going to be a nice bet in this one, in my opinion. If you're a bettor yourself.
Well, what is the over/under? I haven't looked at it.
I'm not too sure, but I can't assume it's probably.
Well, you have to remember you're thinking the under, but it really just depends. You have to remember they adjust the over/under.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is currently set at 48.5, so I like the under that one.
Oh yeah, I like the under too.
Yeah,
which means it's kind of hard. I guess it's kind of hard to win a 10-point cover and the under.
It's very difficult, especially in the SEC. Yeah, it's difficult.
It's not going to be a high-scoring game. That's the thing. It's not going to be a high-scoring game. All right, to the ACC, Clemson -10 at Pitt. I like Clemson this game a lot. I don't think Pitt's any good. They were kind of like what Syracuse was 2 years ago. Or Iowa was in 2015. They were winning a bunch of really close games against below-average teams, and Clemson, the thing with Clemson is that they still have it. Like, even though they laid an egg against Louisville, they've shown that they still have it this year. Like, they've been blowing out a lot of their competition. So, in a game, I really like Clemson to win by 2 touchdowns or more.
Yeah, I agree. I think Clemson's going to go out there and win this game. Pittsburgh right now obviously has no offense. Their quarterback is probably going to be out, Eli Holstein. Even before the injury, he has struggled over the last couple of weeks. They had injuries at wide receiver. I think Clemson, obviously Pittsburgh's got a good defense. They got a stingy secondary that can force turnovers. So I think Clemson's going to go in there. They're going to use the run game a lot, led by Phil Maffa. And I think Clay Klubnik will make a couple good plays. Only throw the ball a little bit so he doesn't put it in harm's way. So I think Clemson will win and cover.
Yeah, I think Clemson's fighting for their season lives at this point, really, because obviously it's not a successful season at Clemson unless you're competing for the national championship. So they're fighting for their lives right now. They're getting Pittsburgh at a really good time, like you mentioned, Anthony. They're banged up. So I think Clemson's going to be able to go on the road and cover. I think they're going to be able to cover that spread.
Yeah. All right. Another matchup in the SEC with a playoff contender, Missouri at South Carolina, minus 12. Yeah, South Carolina is giving 12. Playoff contender. Eli Drinkwitz.
Hey, they're
After
still in
that,
the hunt. No, they're not.
yeah, it's still in the hunt. Okay. Yeah.
This
After
game
that,
is why they won't be anymore officially.
by the way, that game ended in the most Jackson Arnold fashion, a fumble 6. I was like, yeah, Jackson Arnold, gonna Jackson Arnold. So Missouri. In this game, I kind of like South Carolina because Missouri just stinks. Like they're really, really not good. So even though it might feel kind of big, but like South Carolina is a tough team to play. They are a really good home team, and they've shown that they can be very good. And Missouri really isn't. They're really not good. By the way, Missouri is a horrible road team. They are horrible on the road. They always get blown out whenever they play on the road, basically. What's that?
They crushed UMass.
Yeah, well, yeah, Missouri is a terrible road team. I like South Carolina.
Yeah, I like South Carolina in this one too. I said last week, why wasn't South Carolina ranked in the top 25? Well, the committee must have listened to me because now they finally are in the top 25. So, I think when we look at these two teams, we look at a Missouri team that has 2 losses. Frankly, they should have more losses. We look at South Carolina, who's got 3 losses. Maybe they should have less losses. I mean, they have a couple losses in there, but maybe South Carolina has a better record than they should. This defense has been awesome. Lenore Sellers, I think, has been playing better. And Missouri's team is just a team of just inconsistency on defense and offense. Being the home team, South Carolina plays even better at home. So I'm going to go South Carolina to win and cover.
Yeah, in the SEC on the road, Missouri's a combined 75-10.
Not great. Not great.
So, yeah, they're pretty bad.
So Missouri lost by 31 on the road to Texas A&M. They lost by 34 on the road to Alabama. I don't see any reason why on earth they would give South Carolina a game in this one. I really don't. Yeah. But college football can be weird. It really can be. And for some reason, like part of me wants to pick Missouri to cover the spread. Like I don't really know why, but I know for a fact South Carolina will probably end up covering, but I don't know, man. Eli Drinkwitz, get your guys fired up. Keep your guys in the hunt. Keep your guys in the hunt. No, I mean, I think that on paper this shouldn't be a problem for South Carolina. It really shouldn't be. They have looked so good at home. I mean, they have looked unbelievable at home this season, and I don't see any reason why that wouldn't continue, especially against a Missouri team that had a hard time with an Oklahoma team that's also bad. Like Oklahoma's not good this year, so I'll pick South Carolina minus the points in this one. But I wouldn't be surprised if Missouri actually can keep it close. I wouldn't be.
All right. Arizona State at Kansas State -9. I love Arizona State this game. I really do. Arizona State is not all that bad. And Kansas State, like, they're not very good. Like, they needed that comeback win to beat Kansas. They laid an egg against they lost to Houston. The quarterback play is Avery Johnson is very shaky. Like, I don't think he's that good of a player. And I don't think they can cover more than a touchdown spread against almost anybody from what I've seen from Kansas State this year. I am very underwhelmed from what I've seen from Kansas State.
Yeah, I got Kansas State, but no cover. I can't pick Kansas State to cover against anybody. Arizona State, they've been led by their running back, Cam Scatterbo. He's on track to play. Hopefully he plays. That's huge. Obviously, Sam Levitt and Tyson, the receiver, they've been doing good as well. I just question this Arizona State defense. I'm not sure if they could really force Avery Johnson into a lot of mistakes. So because of that, also Kansas State being home, coming off of a loss, and also coming off of a bye, I think Kansas State wins, but no cover.
This is a game that both these teams kind of really need to have. And I personally think that Kansas State needs to have it more than Arizona State does, because Kansas State, in a sense, obviously I know that they've got 2 Big 12 losses, and it's going to be really hard to to probably make the title game. They have to have Colorado lose one, obviously, but it keeps them in the hunt if they put a statement out that they're still right there, because obviously they beat Colorado. But I don't know. I just feel like like you mentioned, come off the bye, like they had a really bad loss last time they took the field. I mean, losing to Houston's terrible. Like that's a really bad loss. I don't care where it's at. I think this is going to be a game where Arizona State is just Arizona State. I think they're going to get outmatched. I think Kansas State's going to look really good in this one. I know they're favored by quite a lot. It's kind of hard to want to pick them against the spread, but this feels like a game that Avery Johnson's going to play like he did against Colorado. I think he's going to play really well in this one. I think Kansas State's going to play really well in this one. They're just going to kind of outmatch Arizona State, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do cover the spread, actually.
All right. So one more. Utah at Colorado. Colorado minus 11.5. I really struggle with this one.
Yeah, it's tough.
I struggle with it because it's a big spread. Utah is coming off a tough loss. You know what? I'm going to go with Utah to cover. I like Utah to cover. I think Colorado will win outright, but I think Utah might be able to cover this. Now, look, Colorado's been pretty good against the spread lately. I just think the spread might be too big. It feels like it might be too big. And Utah can be competitive. I mean, look what we just saw last week against BYU.
Yeah.
And it feels like this Utah team will really be up for this game, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to go Colorado to win and cover. Obviously, I think Utah coming off of that emotional loss, I think that's going to affect them and make them play actually worse, because they actually should have had that win. And I think emotionally that's going to be hard to come back from. I think in the second half, you've really seen Utah's offense not do anything. They're going to be out Brett Keithy. They already struggle at quarterback. They're going to be out Parks, one of their top receivers. So they're going to have to rely on Bernard, the running back. And we know Colorado has done pretty good against running backs. So I think that plays right into Colorado's hands. Utah's pass rush played good last week. Maybe they could give some Colorado fits this week. But I'm going to go Colorado to win and cover. One last thing I'll say, too. You mentioned Colorado's future schedule. I want to say, what about Kansas? That's going to be a tough game for Colorado coming up. Kansas, I want to mention that they did upset Iowa State. Kansas may be 3-6, but they're probably the best 3-6 team in college football history. They actually have a plus 40 point differential. All their losses have been really close. They've been playing competitive. They've blown out some couple teams. So Kansas is a sneaky team that you have to watch out for, and they're able to go out there and beat Rico Beck and Iowa State.
Yeah.
I think I'm all over Colorado in this one. I'm kind of with Anthony that Utah is coming off a loss that they should have won. Colorado's rolling right now. I mean, they really are. I don't see any reason why at home they can't cover against Utah. So I'm all over Colorado in this one.
All right. So finally, new edition, end of the show, unnecessary wagers. So here it is. Here's my unnecessary wager of the week. Phil Maffa as an anytime touchdown scorer. LSU minus 4.5 at Florida. Dylan Sampson as an anytime touchdown scorer against Georgia. BYU minus 2.5 against Kansas. 2.5 point favorites.
Always something like that. It's always like 2.5 or 3.5 or something like that.
And BYU's playing at home too, so that means Vegas is telling you BYU and Kansas are equals.
Yeah, they really are.
Told you, watch out for Kansas.
Oregon minus 14 at Wisconsin. South Carolina money line. Notre Dame minus 22.5 against Virginia. Virginia stinks. That should be an easy game for Notre Dame.
Hey, Virginia just beat Pittsburgh. Watch out.
Yeah. Well, what were you saying about Pitt? Texas minus 13.5 at Arkansas. I took USC money line against Nebraska. They're at home. USC's at home this game.
Okay.
And they're 8.5 point favorites. So
they bet no one lost, right? I think their new quarterback coming there could give them a spark.
Yeah. And then I took Quinshon Judkins for 70+ rushing yards at Northwestern and Jeremiah Smith for 70+ receiving yards.
How many legs is that?
11. It's $5 to pay out $1,215.53.
Why not?
So basically $5 to win $1,200, basically.
Why not?
Now that you're going to Vegas, this will be the week you're going to hit it.
Yeah, I know. All right, so that's our show this week. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Forever Power 5. We'll be back next week.